the channel. Today, we're going to be discussing Hard Times by Charles Dickens. As you might expect, this is a Penguin edition, but I'm also going to be reading from the Norton Critical Edition today, just to give some more critical background. This is Dickens' shortest novel, which even when Dickens is short, we're talking about 268 pages in this Penguin edition. So I think most of us, when we think of a Dickens novel, we're thinking of something that's at least 500 pages. So a few of my friends discuss the fact that this might be a great introduction to Dickens for someone who might feel intimidated. Say, I've not read a Dickens, too many pages feels intimidating. You might start with Hard Times. Now, interestingly, in my research for this, I found out that John Ruskin thinks this was his best novel ever. It's not his best novel ever, but people are free to think that. In fact, another adjacent bit of criticism from George Bernard Shaw said, I don't know why people feel the need to compare art like they would sports teams, which I think is an interesting one because I've often been pulled into the best of, greatest, favorite, that sort of thing. I think favorite is far more important and legitimate than greatest or best, etc. Anyway, Dickens is doing here is what he does successfully so many other times: look at an existing social problem, criticize it using caricatured figures that, even in their caricature, convey an important truth. And here we have, because of the compressed size of the novel, we really get to know all of our characters fairly well. And you can see their roles. You can see their roles within the novel, but I think too, Dickens has left threads that he would have normally used to build bigger stories. I think he's used to working with greater canvases. So you see some characters being underused. For example, Sissy Jupe, who is an important character, she starts the novel, and I actually thought was going to be about her, and it's not about her at all. And so she is there's so much to her that we could get to know more about, and Dickens doesn't give it to us because he didn't choose to do so within this volume. This is particularly looking at industrial labor in England. It was around the time of an important strike in Preston, and I'm gonna read that now for you just to give you some context for it. So this is taken from, I said, the Norton Critical Edition. And if you're not familiar with Norton Critical, if you want to really study a particular work, it's hard to do better than a single volume of Norton Critical, because they're going to have the text annotated, and then they're going to have historical context and criticism and essays, and I love them. In the summer of 1853, after the Preston weavers were refused a 10% increase in wages, God forbid, strikes were called at some of the textile mills. The mill owners responded in late October by closing all the mills in the town, and to obtain food and clothing, the Preston strikers had thereafter to rely on subscriptions collected from union members in other manufacturing towns where the factories were still operating. In addition to such subscriptions, the union leaders relied upon speeches and rallies to sustain morale throughout the lockout. But as the Illustrated London News noted, ignorant and violent speeches may keep up a fading enthusiasm for a short time longer, but the wintry cold, the fireless grate, the empty cupboard, will deprive the oratory of their leaders of the power to persuade them that no bread is better than half a loaf, or that charity wrung from their fellows is pleasanter to live upon than their own honest earnings. This prediction, made on December the 10th, 1853, was accurate but premature. Not until late April 1854 did the strike collapse, and the dispirited participants resume work in the mills. By May the 1st, the Times reported with satisfaction 7,700 strikers had returned to their looms. Their leaders, George Cowell and Mortimer Grimshaw, whose speeches Dickens described, had been arrested in March on charges of conspiracy, although after the failure of the strike they were never brought to trial. But the principal reason for giving in seems to have been the drying up of the funds contributed from other towns, funds on which the Preston strikers had become entirely dependent. Sort of a larger conversation about the role of strikes today, the role of unions. Unions have taken on a far more left-wing slant in many years, particularly in the United States. I can say, definitely, having been a member of a journalist trade union in Europe, there is an enormous left-wing spirit to a lot of these unions. But strangely enough, unions are a descendant of the guilds, and the guilds were put in place to protect craftsmen, workers, etc., not by the church, but by Catholics who were in the church, who had their minds formed by the proper place of labor and work and harmony between your daily life and the way that you conduct your business and the way that business is conducted among the people in your town, your village, whatever it might be. So today, people will think of unions as espousing leftist causes, and I think most of the time they would be right. But at the end of the day, part of what they're trying to look at is humane working conditions. And that is a good thing to work for. Uh, Mixing in leftist rhetoric with it is not good. But what is good is recognizing that we have a relationship with each other as worker and employer. And it's not just transactional. I give you money, you work for me, end of story. There is something approaching a familial relationship. That's how I feel with my team members, other people that I work with, that it's not just here today, gone tomorrow. It would be very hurtful if that was the case. But that's because I think I've had a chance to study and learn and understand the church's teaching on this and form my mind accordingly. Anyway, enough prelude. As usual, I'm going to read some quotes, give you a sense of the text, give you a sense of what's being discussed, and hopefully interest you in reading what I already alluded to is Dickens' shortest novel. The late Mr. Sparsit, being by the mother's side a Powler, married this lady, being by the father's side a Scadgers. Lady Scadgers, an immensely fat old woman with an inordinate appetite for butcher's meat, and a mysterious leg which had now refused to get out of bed for 14 years, contrived the marriage at a period when Sparsit was just of age, and chiefly noticeable for a slender body, weakly supported on 2 long slim props, and surmounted by no head worth mentioning. He inherited a fair fortune from his uncle, but owed it all before he came into it, and spent it twice over immediately afterwards. Thus, when he died at 24, the scene of his decease, Calais, and the cause, brandy, he did not leave his widow, from whom he had been separated soon after the honeymoon, in affluent circumstances. That bereaved lady, 15 years older than he, fell presently at deadly feud with her only relative, Lady Scadgers, and partly to spite her ladyship and partly to maintain herself, went out at a salary. And here she was now, in her elderly days, with the Coriolanian style of nose and the dense black eyebrows which had captivated Sparsit, making Mr. Bounderby's tea as he took his breakfast. So Mrs. Sparsit is a major character in this book, and what a fascinating introduction we get from a classic Dickens introduction to a character, full of asides and wonderful, rich descriptions, which take you right into that character. You know that character, not just the way she looks, but the way she acts, right from a paragraph or two. Remember I told you Sissy Jupe was supposed to be the main character? This is describing her. The wretched ignorance with which Jupe clung to this consolation, the consolation that her father might come to get her. Not spoiler alert, but spoiler note. There's a child abandonment story here. The wretched ignorance with which Jupe clung to this consolation, rejecting the superior comfort of knowing, on a sound arithmetical basis, that her father was an unnatural vagabond, filled Mr. Gradgrind with pity. Yet what was to be done? Amchokumchild reported that she had a very dense head for figures, that once possessed with a general idea of the globe, she took the smallest conceivable interest in its exact measurements, that she was extremely slow in the acquisition of dates, unless some pitiful incident happened to be connected therewith, that she would burst into tears on being required, by the mental process, immediately to name the cost of 247 muslin caps at 14 pence halfpenny, or halfpenny as they would say in England, that she was as low down in the school as low could be, that after 8 weeks of induction into the elements of political economy, she had only yesterday been set right by a prattler 3 feet high for returning to the question, what is the first principle of this science? The absurd answer, to do unto others as I would that they should do unto me. So another part of the book is this argument for utilitarian Benthamite principles of the poor should not be allowed to reproduce. They're the scum of our society. They can't be trusted to spend their own money. They shouldn't be given that much money anyway. And what children need is to be educated in facts, just the facts. Don't worry about fairies and fiction and dragons and any of that other stuff that help to build a moral imagination. We're interested in facts. And I think Dickens skewers this as well, very well. Now, we're starting to see a little bit of a softening of one of the children who was raised in this just the facts, ma'am atmosphere. And she's trying to probe a little bit to understand Sissy. Your mother, father says she was quite a scholar. She died when I was born. She was, Sissy made the terrible communication nervously. She was a dancer. Did your father love her? Louisa asked these questions with a strong, wild, wandering interest peculiar to her, an interest gone astray like a banished creature and hiding in solitary places. Oh, yes, as dearly as he loves me. Father loved me first for her sake. He carried me about with him when I was quite a baby. We have never been asunder from that time. And you'll see this develop further in the novel that when love and fiction and imagination and music and stories are removed from a childhood, a child doesn't develop naturally and parts of that child become distorted, perverted. And we see that in two of the children who come from this household, the very happy name Gradgrind, which as usual, Dickens loves to use the onomatopoeia of some of the words, or for example, there's a character named Rachel, the novel, which has a link to the biblical Rachel as well in terms of how she's construed. But all to say that if we're thinking of two arguments in apart to the regular character development that we're seeing in Dickens' novel, one is what happens to children who are not properly formed with a moral imagination, and what happens to a town that is dominated by industry in which you have owners who don't care, where it's all about a transaction for them with their workers. And they feel no moral responsibility, not only to the town or to their workers, but they just feel like it's just about profits. That's my only responsibility. Invisible hand nonsense, Kevin O'Leary's Shark Tank nonsense. This is what the Protestant revolt has delivered to us. A purely transactional marketplace where we're about making money and we have no moral obligations and no familial ties to each other. And it's brutally brought out in this novel. Now, I alluded to the character Rachel. Here is a description of her waiting on someone else. Quiet and peace were there. Rachel was there, sitting by the bed. She turned her head, and the light of her face shone in upon the midnight of his mind. She sat by the bed, watching and tending his wife. That is to say, he saw that someone lay there, and he knew too well it must be she. But Rachel's hands had put a curtain up, so that she was screened from his eyes. Her disgraceful garments were removed, and some of Rachel's were in the room. Everything was in its place and order as he had always kept it. The little fire was newly trimmed, and the hearth was freshly swept. It appeared to him that he saw all this in Rachel's face, and looked at nothing besides. While looking at it, it was shut out from his view by the softened tears that filled his eyes, but not before he had seen how earnestly she looked at him, and how her own eyes were filled too. She turned again towards the bed, and satisfying herself that all was quiet there, spoke in a low, calm, cheerful voice. I am glad you have come at last, Stephen. You are very late. Remember, if you're enjoying this content, remember to hit like, subscribe, share this with people who might be interested in reading more fiction, Dickens, building out their moral imagination. It's never too late. Sir, rejoined Mrs. Sparsit, say no more. In yielding up my trust here, I shall not be freed from the necessity of eating the bread of dependence. She might have said the sweet bread, for that delicate article in a savory brown sauce was her favorite supper. And I would rather receive it from your hand than from any other. Therefore, sir, I accept your offer gratefully, and with many sincere acknowledgments for past favors. And I hope, sir, said Mrs. Sparsit, concluding in an impressively compassionate manner, I fondly hope that Miss Gradgrind may be all you desire and deserve. Mysterious at this point. It's only 95 pages in, so we're only a little over a third into the novel, but alluding to what's going to happen and how she's going to be involved. Anyway, Hard Times, Charles Dickens. If you want to get a copy, I'll put a link to the Penguin edition and to the Norton Critical edition in the description of the video. That's one of the ways that you can support our work, by buying a copy. You can also, as I said before, like, subscribe, share, hype, all the YouTube stuff. That helps the channel grow, helps it get out to more people. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there's links to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee below. If you'd like to get early access to videos like this one, as well as a monthly behind-the-scenes exclusive video, there's Patreon and YouTube membership. Whichever platform you choose, the benefits are the same. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wish list is below. You'll see books for Palestine on that wish list. That's for my Palestine bookshelf channel if you're interested in taking a look at that. But otherwise, if it's books not on Palestine that's for this channel, feel free to buy one, send it my way, and I'll do my best to review it in a timely manner. As always, until next time, enjoy your reading.